What's up, guys? Welcome back to the A to Z series here on the Card Guys YouTube channel. This is episode number 5, and today we are not talking about Warrior. We are talking about actually one of the best heroes against Warrior. We're talking about Riptide, Lurker of the Deep. And with me today, I have my good friend and one of the strongest players in the Southeast US region, Damien Riggins. Welcome, Damien, to episode 5 of A to Z. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing wonderful. Hey, today I got to play Blaze in an armory, so I'm a happy man. That's the only way to beat Zed and Blitz, guys. Pro tip. Okay, but we're not talking about Zen. We're not talking about Blaze today. We're talking about the Green Man himself, Riptide. And I think this hero, when we were designing the A to Z series, right, we were like, okay, what heroes should we put like towards the, beginning of the season versus the end of the season, and who should get what heroes is another thing that came up, right? And so obviously the team was like, yeah, Josh, you get the Warriors, but I was like, I actually want to learn more about Riptide, because I'm personally am very, very confused because there's like 18 different builds of Riptide. They all play a little bit differently, and Riptide is very similar to Warrior in that it's a mid-range hero. It can play fast, it can play slower, it can play more reactive if it wants to, it can go tall, it can go wide, and there seems to be a lot of benefit from playing the deck a lot. I think Riptide is not a deck that you could just pick up and play. I know, Damien, you play a lot of different heroes, but I personally, when I tried to play Riptide, I think I might have even played a couple games with you coaching me on this. It was really, really, really difficult. So I guess, but with that introduction out of the way, Damien, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and, how long have you been playing Riptide, and why are you the guy to go to for Riptide advice?
Well, I'm Damien. I've been playing Riptide for about 2 years. Well, I've
Since
been playing him since
Outsiders.
around when he came out.
Yep.
He's very fun with all these trap shenanigans that you can do to your opponent. I think he's mainly an aggro deck in this current meta. In certain other metas, he can be like a very powerful mid-range deck or like control deck. But in this meta where you need to go fast and you can't give Zen time to idle around and transcend, you need to go really fast.
Yes.
So
And
this is a
the illusionists as well. You can't give them much
yes.
time to set
You
up.
can't
Yeah.
give them time to set up, or you will lose the game to Arclight Sentinel.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been playing for quite a while. Have you brought Riptide to? I know you played him in some calling, some battle hardens.
I've taken him to
Yep.
some RTNs. I took him to the Nationals, and I played in the Battle Hardened.
Yep.
I went 6-2 at Nationals, and CC was Riptide, and then I went 7-2 at the Battle Hardened. I bubbled out of top 8.
Unfortunate, but that's okay. Okay, so do you use Twitter by any chance?
No.
No. Okay. But you do have a team of like-minded Riptide players that you have developed decks with. You also make content for. You want to shout them out if you for you guys at home, this is going to be kind of like an introductory kind of like overview. If you want like really in-depth Riptide videos, where can they go find all those things?
Wait, I'm on a team called New Horizons. We're about a team of like 4 people currently. We do a lot of Riptide deck testing and deck building.
Yep.
You can find them on YouTube.
Okay. Well, yep. Go check out New Horizons on YouTube. We'll have a link to that in the description. Okay. Well, Damien, you referenced that there are several ways to build Riptide. Currently, we have, for the lovely people at home, a deck list that is a little bit more aggro focused, and this includes some of the Azalea Armory deck cards, in addition to some of the. You said there's some cards from the Rosetta set as well, or
No,
not yet? Oh, these are Stone Rain and Sharpshooters and
Line It Up.
line it up. Okay, so there's this is a updated, fresh, like the Azalea Armory deck came out very very recently. So this is a updated list, and so we're gonna break this down for you guys. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you mentioned how being aggressive is very, very important. Can you talk a little bit more about the different styles of Riptide? Because I think people are very confused because, like, when you talk about, like, Dory, it's, like, very obvious. It's like, did they present Dawnblade? Did they present Decimator? Or did they present Hatchets, right? With Riptide, mostly it's going to be Death Dealer or Dreadbore, but then the card choices, there's, like, a core, but then there seems to be like 30 flex slots. So can you talk to us a little bit about the different styles of Riptide?
Yeah, so the main version of Riptide that we have the deck list pulled up for is aggro. It's more of a red line deck that plays Estrikes and Ravenous Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of pumps. It doesn't activate the bow too often, but when it does, it likes to make utilizing some New Horizon lines.
Okay.
We play Snapdragon Scalers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like barbed castaway lists that are more aim counter focused that play like immobilizing shot.
Mm-hmm.
And they take use of these aim counters very well, and they do a lot better with New Horizons because they can flip over their arsenal.
Okay.
And they can still load bows with barbed castaway.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the other end, which is like a control deck that doesn't play Death Dealer. They play Dreadbore, Perch Grapplers, and like Long Drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like a very like grindy deck that play like CNC, battering bolts,
Mm-hmm.
Big attacks of that variety.
Multiple copies of Remembrance. You also have the Quiver to get things back. So that would be a deck that would, probably run closer to 70 cards in most matchups.
The key to telling which Riptide you're playing against when the game starts is to look at which boots they're playing and which gloves they're playing and their bow.
Okay.
So if they flip over Snapdragons, they're most likely an aggro deck or an aggro variant deck.
Okay.
But if they flip over Perch Gloppers and Dreadbore, you could be sure you're in for a pretty long game.
Okay. Before we start talking about, the equipment and the specific cards, why don't you talk to us a little bit about where you see Riptide positioned in the metagame, and why should people play Riptide? I know most people have put Riptide in around A tier, and some people have even said, if you have a very good pilot, very, very good gem luck, Riptide arguably could be in the S tier. So yeah, why should people, be playing Riptide?
I think that he is very powerful value-based deck. I would agree with people saying that he's A tier because he doesn't have a favorable Zen matchup. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it's playable. But he has an incredible assassin matchup.
Yep.
And he's got a really decent KO matchup. Buzsaw does a lot in that matchup if you see it. And then your Inertia Traps and stuff.
Yep.
And then the aggro version of Riptide specifically has a good Enigma matchup because of Merkmire Grapnel.
Yep.
And being able to go wide and stop their prevention and whatnot.
Yep. And the hero ability actually is kind of unique against ward based or like Prism or Enigma, because if you deal a damage to them on their turn, that can kind of mess up things.
It
kind
does
of like
come
Reckless
up a
Swing,
lot.
Steelblade Shunt. Yeah. Riptide, correct me if I'm wrong, but like in terms of Enigma versus the metagame, like Riptide is like a unique matchup for them, mainly because of this ability to deal damage on the Enigma player's turn.
I think the thing that scares Enigmas the most about Riptide is Dreadbore. They have a lot of auras in their deck.
Yes.
And they like to supplement them with like defense reactions.
Okay.
So they do cut defense reactions into us, but I don't think they can cut them all. So that does tend to make the matchup really skewed sometimes.
Okay. All right, let's break down this deck for the lovely people at home. So I guess the very first equipment piece to talk about, and the the name of your team, is New Horizons. I think this is this a standard piece of equipment for Riptide, or is this kind of just for the aggressive matchups, or
this is the only headpiece in my deck.
Okay.
In aggro, I think this is the correct headpiece because it allows some really cool codex lines. It
Mhm.
lets you sit on certain arrows. Like in the Enigma matchup, it lets you load a Murkmire face up, play a pump, and then fire a different arrow and sit on the Murkmire until you feel like you need it.
Okay.
And then when you need it, you can clear their board. There is other versions of Riptide that play Balance of Justice.
Mhm.
I don't think it's that bad. A
Mhm.
Balance of Justice makes your KO matchup better, your Zen matchup better, but they're really only played in like longer decks.
Right.
Like
Okay. Okay,
yeah.
so New Horizons mainly for the aggressive matchups, and Balance of Justice, maybe Crown of Providence for the longer matchups, or is it mainly just Balance of Justice just because it's
It's
more
mainly
value?
just balance
Okay.
because balance
You could
is worse.
trench things away if your
Mhm.
arsenal's under attack. Okay, well, speaking of trench, this is the one of the most important pieces of equipment for Riptide. This is basically you never block with this until the very end of the game, right?
Yeah, if your deck is built to play with trench and you block with trench,
Mm-hmm.
you better end the game pretty fast
Yep.
because this makes certain cards unarsenalable.
Yep.
Blocking with this will IP yourself some games
Mm-hmm.
for a number of turns.
Okay. Is there specific interactions between New Horizons and Trench that people need to be aware of?
Not really. There's some trench codex lines though that you
Mm-hmm.
do. So you have to discard a card for codex sometimes, and you can't really pitch red cards to your bow. So you can like play a pump
Mm-hmm.
or play a codex and arsenal from Riptide's ability in trench, and then grab a 1-cost arrow and fire it.
Okay.
But apart from that, there are no special interactions really with New Horizons and trench.
Okay. Sure. Okay, let's I guess let's talk about we'll talk about the weapons and the boots later because there's a choice between them. In this particular build, you only have one arm piece, I believe, and this is the new Sharpshooters equipment piece from the Azalea Armory deck. So this one says, as an action, destroy this. Put an arrow from your hand face up into your arsenal with an aim counter. Go again. Has battle worn 1. So kind of like bullseye bracers, but instead of getting the +1, you're getting an aim counter, which I guess relevant for, gives piercing on drill shot.
It's really
Gives
only for
plus
one
one.
card in the deck.
Okay, which
It's
one would that be?
Stone Rain.
Stone Ring. Ah, right, the other one of the new
It's
arrows. Mm-hmm.
guaranteed dominate
Mm-hmm.
and the effect.
Okay, so would you be using this equipment piece in like towards the end of the game, or is it mainly just to land an
So
on hit, or
it would be like because Stone Rain rips a card from your opponent's hand
mm-hmm.
if it has a name counter on it.
Right?
So if you need to present disruption, you think that dominating this arrow, putting them close to like single digit numbers where you can close out the game with traps.
Mm-hmm.
There are arguments sometimes where if you draw 3 pumps and a Stone Rain in your starting hand, you could just start the game with 13 dominate.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a number of lines that you could take with this. It's all like it's hard to say that there's any one line you would take with this,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just a very powerful card and it's very flexible.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that's Sharpshooters. Let's talk about the Quiver. So this is the Quiver of Abyssal Depths. This was used in Lexi, mainly for longer fatigue matchups. This, I guess, is just mainly there because you kind of get it for free.
Yep, there's no other quiver really to run. Since we play Trench, there's no point in playing Deadwood Quiver.
Mhm.
If you were playing Tunic, you would. And then the Quiver of Rustling Leaves, we don't play blue cards, so we can't
Yep.
really do anything with that. And
Yeah.
sometimes
Look at
you
this
have
ratio.
sometimes you have full tempo,
Mhm.
and you let's pretend that you draw some arrows, or you got to the end of the game and you're out of pumps and you have arrows. You can just like use this as a pitch outlet to filter your hand
Okay.
to put some arrows back in the deck. It helps in fatigue
Mhm.
matchups. If you have an extra blue trap in your hand, you can pitch it to activate this.
Okay. Okay.
All around, it's a free card.
Mhm. And it says shuffle up to 3 arrows with different names. Is there any particular arrow that you're looking to get back?
Depending on the matchup, it would be like Endless Arrow if you're looking to not get fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing against like Zen, it'd be Sleep Dart, Remorseless.
Sleep Dart,
Um,
Remorseless. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Solid. Okay. So you alluded to this earlier that there is a choice of bow. So we have the good old Depth Dealer printed with Azalea. I think many people are familiar with this bow. And we also have, where is it? Right here, Dreadbore. So Dreadbore, like you said, is typically for the longer matchups, and it gives a +1. So kind of like all your arrows, instead of coming in for 4 or 5, starting to come in for 5 or 6. And over the course of the game, that can make quite a bit difference. Also, it makes the second ability is really, really, really powerful. It's one of the like if they catch you with 2 D reacts at the same time, you basically IP yourself. So can you talk a little bit about Death Dealer versus Dreadbore, kind of which matchups and how you would use these weapons?
Well, you would use Death Dealer in matchups where you need to go fast.
Mhm.
But there are certain matchups that you need to go fast that you don't play Death Dealer in because of you can like splash percentages around.
Mhm.
So there are matchups that you suspect that your opponent plays D-Reacts like Runeblade and Dash. In those matchups, you're never really loading your bow
Mhm.
because you'll never have the extra pitch cards because you have to block so often due to like a Mauvrin Skies or like a Widespread,
Mhm.
something along those lines. So you play Dreadborn to those matchups because it weighs percentages into like Sigil of Suffering and Reduce to Rune Chant if somebody's playing like Turtle Burst or they're playing Vincent with like defense reactions. You play Dreadborn to dash in case they're flab. Because your main goal in the dash is like you need to aggro them down for the most part, unless you think you can fatigue them.
Okay.
But you try to play Dreadborn in matchups you think they're gonna have defense reactions in.
Okay. You mentioned how generally you're not loading with your bow. I think this is something that we didn't really talk about very much. We didn't actually talk about the hero ability. Whenever you play a card from hand, you may put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. So you said in general you are not really loading because one resource is kind of difficult for a deck with 45-9-3.
Don't get me wrong, you do pitch to your bow when you have extra cards. Like
Mm-hmm.
your opponent like sent a claw for 3 and wants to set up.
Mm-hmm.
You do get to pitch sometimes to dig deeper in your deck for like a pump.
Okay.
But mainly it's like Estrike, go again, reload an arrow, Rabble, reload an arrow, play a pump, reload an arrow,
Yeah.
play a trap on your opponent's turn, reload an arrow, fire it, Arsenal, Codex,
Okay. Sure. That's yeah, I think that's one of the things that may take some getting used to if you're used to Azalea or Lexi, is that you're not really loading your arsenal with your bow that often. Okay. The other card, Perch Grapplers. You basically will never use the activated ability. This is just for an extra 2 block. Because this 2 block plus this 1 block plus a 3 block from hand covers up a lot of annoying things like Command and Conquer or just several breakpoints. Yep.
I will say that the ability on Perch Grapplers comes up in Christmas Land sometimes. I've had 32 damage turns with Perch Grapplers before.
Okay,
but
so it's very rare.
It's like 1 in 20 games. But when it comes up, it's like what you would expect would happen. You fire Endless Arrow like a bunch.
Okay. And you would mainly... So normally the bows say, once per turn. So if you can play a pump, fire an arrow, and then load with the bow, fire it, and then maybe use your sharpshooters, that's how you can go 3 or 4 wide.
Yeah.
Okay, so not just Lexi can go 3 or 4 wide. All the Rangers in Magical Christmas Land can go 3 or 4 wide. Okay. Okay, so now that we've talked about all the equipment in the deck, let's break down the main deck. So where do we want to start? Do we want to start with the arrows? Do we want to start with the pumps? Do we want to start with the power cards? How would you recommend approaching this deck list?
I think we should start with the arrows.
Okay.
Because that's where the main source of your damage will be coming from.
Okay, let's knock them out. So good old bolt and shot.
The best
Uh,
card in the game.
yeah, the second best
Yeah.
Bolton card in the game. Coming in at red and yellow, so 6 copies of Bolton Shot. I mean, it comes in
This,
for a breakpoint. The reload is that. Um,
this card's a trap.
This card is a trap. Okay.
Yeah, for your opponent.
Your opponent,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So the reload is like never relevant because if I have like a Bolton Shot face up and I play an arrow, I would have just reloaded the second arrow I was going to play. So most of the time this doesn't have an on hit.
Mhm.
There are some decks that play like Death Touch and stuff, but
Mhm.
this most of the time will not have like an on hit other than the laces that you put on it or the Seek and Destroys. But this
Yep.
card having Go Again lets you do some really nasty go wide turns.
Mhm. Okay. Would you say in general, when you're going aggressive, you're going too wide, or are you going one with a bunch of pumps, kind of like Azalea, or is it kind of depends on your hand?
I would say the average hand is pumps and arrow for 7.
Mhm.
A more aggressive hand would be like have a Rabble in it or a Bolton Shot or a Falcon Wing. And a very aggressive hand would go like 3 to 4 wide.
Okay.
It has like that would be like a Codex hand.
Okay. Okay. So there's sometimes you're going one chain link, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. It kind of depends on the texture of the hand. Okay. All right. So moving on, one of the other great 0 cost 4 power arrows is Drill Shot. Those of you who played against Lexi will remember this very well. So theoretically, this could have an aim counter, but I think you mentioned how we're mainly using the arm piece for Stone Rain. So this is basically just something very, very annoying that's going to eat at armor.
Yep, armor's been more important than it's ever been. Drill Shot's insane.
Yep. I guess when we talk about Ranger, a lot of their stuff comes in for 4 or 5 or 6 if you have Dreadbore. So these breakpoints eat up armor very, very quickly, and Drill Shot, helps with that. All right. Speaking of 0 cost breakpoint arrows, we have Endless Arrow, also known as Snatch that draws Snatch, but blocks for 3. I don't know what is there really to say about this other than it's one of the GOAT arrows.
Yep, it's just one of the best. It's a 0/4.
Would you let's say you have a 2 or 3 chain link hand? Are you going to end with Endless Arrow? Are you going to start your turn with Endless Arrow to maybe bait out?
I would attempt without like any knowledge of the board state. I would always attempt to end with Endless Arrow because ending with an Arsenal in this deck is much higher value than the other decks. Because all you need to do, if this hits and you like draw a pump, you can block 9, maybe do some traps, and then like lace Endless Arrow and just go, do this again? This has an on hit now.
Can you explain to the people at home and to me why ending with an Arsenal is so critical for this deck list? Is it mainly because of the New Horizons, or is it just
It's just value because like it's mainly just accruing value over time. This is a value-based deck, and like the numbers do add up over turn cycles. Also, trenching is very important because if you like hit an Endless Arrow and you go to your turn and you draw 3 arrows in a Codex, you can block for 9, trench, and then Codex for a Disruptive Arrow in your graveyard. So it turns your arsenal into a resource or more damage, which is incredible.
For me personally, I have some reps against Riptide, but I don't have the most reps. But that is something that I have felt as well, is that over the course of the game, you're just like, how am I 8 life behind and no tempo? And it's just like, when you kind of look at the list, nothing really stands out. But I do like how you said it's like a value deck that accrues value over time, and it could like speed up the accruement of value. Yeah, this is helping me understand more and more and more about this deck, because often when I play against this deck, I'm just like, how am I behind by this much? So, all right, let's skip Estrike. Let's talk about some more 0 cost arrows. We got Falcon Wing, kind of like Bolton Shot, helps you go wide, but this is a little bit more. I guess it's the head jab of arrows.
Go again.
It's got go again.
That's really all there is to this one. It's got to go again. The reason it's at 2 instead of 3 is because Bolton shot yellow pitches for 2.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So moving up the cost curve, we have Infecting Shot. I guess I have to ask why Infecting Shot and not I forgot the name of it. Is it Inertia Shot or whatever the other one is?
It's Sedation Shot.
Sedation Shot,
So,
and there's another
Blood
one.
Rot's Withering Shot.
Withering Shot.
So, Infecting Shot is just a 1 for 7 if it hits. And the Blood Rot can be more than 2 damage sometimes. Because if you hit a Prism with an Infecting Shot or an Enigma, and they have something with Ward that they want to make, it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
So, this arrow is just really good in my opinion. And if you stick with Lace with Blood on it, this arrow gets really nasty really fast.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just steals tempo from the opponent. They basically have to block or they lose a bunch of value. And like you said, this is one of the ways to deal damage on the illusionist's turn through the Blood Rot Pox tokens. For all my Bolton boys out there, if you have Soul Bond Resolve, this will the Soul Bond Resolve will block one of the Blood Rot Pox damage. All right, so we have some more pumps. Let's talk about those later. Okay, so moving on to another 1-cost arrow. We got Remorseless. Another Lexi All-Star sees its way into Azalea and Riptide decks.
Sarah's very powerful.
It seems kind of like Blood Rot, Infecting Shot. Against most decks, playing an action card and losing a life, this fairly regularly translates to 6 or 7 damage, or 5 plus 1, 5 plus 2.
This card can get a lot more value depending on which cards are in your hand. So if your opponent has like Arsenal to D-React because you're on Dreadbore, and you load this, and then you play a Seek and Destroy, and this isn't blockable, or it comes in for like 14 because you drew like a bunch of pumps, this can like IP2 your opponent, depending on how it hits. And they're under Remorseless. So the not being able to play defense reaction from Arsenal is quite huge.
Yes.
We used to play Release the Tension in the deck, but then we just cut it from the deck, and Remorseless just shows how powerful not being able to defense reaction your Arsenal is.
Yeah, Release the Tension, one of the most annoying cards in Azalea, and that effect translating here to Remorseless. Yeah, if you've ever gotten caught by the first line of text in Remorseless, you know how bad that feels. Okay, moving on, going back to 0-cost arrows, we have Searing Shot, very similar theme to Infecting Shot and Remorseless. This is just on hit extra damage, which helps you accrue value over the course of the game. Yeah, is there anything really to say about Searing Shot?
Nope. It's a 0 for 5.
Okay. I guess eventually we're going to get to Codex, but in terms of these 0-cost arrows, are you generally grabbing Searing Shot as your 0-cost arrow or Endless Arrow, I presume?
Depends on how much armor they have. It could be Drill Shot most of the time, just if I want to eat away.
Right. Okay. So if they still have armor, Drill Shot going to be better there. Okay. Yeah. We got Sleep Dart. Oh boy. A lot of heroes in the game need their hero ability to have a functional turn, other than Dash IE and a few exceptions. Losing their hero effect and activated abilities is devastating. I think even against Dash IE, you're still playing this, right?
Yeah, blocks 3. It's an arrow. We can't really cut arrows from the main deck. It's just like turning off hero abilities is so powerful. It's just like Zen can't tutor. KO's cards aren't 6s. You know, it's just a very powerful effect.
Bolton collapses.
This card, that card in the matchup that it's good, just steals cards from your opponent's hand.
Yep.
And it's just tempo.
Okay, before we talk about Stone Rain, you mentioned how we can't cut arrows from the deck. So it looks like there's 3, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19, 22, 25. So there's 28 arrows. There's a couple in the sideboard as well. Obviously, things like Codex and Quiver can bring things back. But in general, 28 arrows. Is this something that has been, you know, how in depth and mathy and hyper geometric and all that did you go into when building this deck?
I don't really use a calculator or anything. I just play a lot of games on Riptide, and I just fill out the numbers.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And 28 arrows feels good. Okay.
It feels good as long as you're playing Rabbles and Estrikes. If you weren't playing those cards, you would have arrows in those spots.
Okay. So this is a kind of like Runeblade in that you have like a little bit more than half attack actions, a little bit less than half non-attack actions. Okay. The last arrow is Stone Rain. Like we mentioned before, this is going to be used with the gloves.
Yep, this card's nasty.
Yep.
This card also is really nasty with Line It Up. Because you can, like, if you have a Stone Rain and a Line It Up in your hand, and you have, like, that endless arrow we talked about hitting in your arsenal, you can trench, play Line It Up, Riptide, reload the Stone Rain, flip it face up, give it an aim counter, and fire 7 Dominate, and it rips the card.
Yeah. Okay. So Stone Rain, the first copy you see generally is going to be used with the gloves, but then after that you would be looking for some Line It Up into Stone Rain lines.
If the Stone Rain is good enough to break my gloves and I don't have a Line It Up, I would definitely break the gloves for sure.
Okay. It seems like these 3 cards have would you say there's been a great boost to the power level of the deck, or is it like just a little bit of
I would say so, because Line It Up doesn't just have synergy with Stone Rain. Flipping up Drill Shot and giving it piercing could make armor blocks very inefficient.
Yep.
Or like flipping up like an Infecting and making it 9. There's just like a bunch of lines you could take with Line It Up that are pretty awesome.
Okay. So if you guys do not have an Azalea Armory deck, Damien, this is a market recommendation from you to go get one.
Yeah, Line It Up and Stone Rain are very powerful.
Okay. I think we've talked about all the arrows in the main deck. I guess let's just talk about Murkmire Grapnel. Well, now we kind of know why this was in Outsiders. This was kind of a place there for the future.
Yep. If your opponent is playing Ward, aka if they are an illusionist player, this card is coming in the deck.
Yeah.
This is your best way to combat that. It's not as good as against Prism as you might think, but it's incredible against Enigma.
And this is the card that you would be getting back as many times as you can with Codex and the Quiver and all that.
Yes, I would Codex for Murkmire against Enigma depending on the board state.
Okay, sure. Okay, so we've talked about all the arrows. Let's talk about the other attack actions, and then we'll talk about the pumps. So the very first one is Estrike. Good old faithful Estrike. Generally used as the starter just to get something in Arsenal. Is that generally how it's used, or is it
so
on blocking duty?
It's a hand fixer.
Okay.
So if your hand fires an arrow very like smoothly and it's very value, and this card goes on the combat chain blocking, I want to say like half the time. But if you have full tempo, it's an extender. If your hand's like bad, it helps you fix it.
Okay.
It's a 2-card 7 or a 2-card 5 draw card, which is also pretty good because arsenaling anything in the deck is applicable to a trench.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the great things about Estrike draw is who cares what it is. Same thing for Azalea, same thing for Dromai. That's one of the benefits of those decks. Is like, oh, Ponder token pops, we could stick anything in their arsenal, and then Dromai running like nearly full mono red. Everything that they draw is generally pretty decent. Okay, speaking of Dromai, one of the favorite cards for Dromai was Ravenous Rabble. In this deck, the only yellows and blues are just down here. So this is coming in for 4, like 85% of the time.
Most of the time, yes.
Yep. Is there any benefit from knowing what card is on the top of your deck? Like sometimes Azalea wants to know.
There's a lot of value.
Okay.
From Death Dealer, you play Rabble if you're on Death Dealer first to see if you want to activate your bow.
Hmm. Okay.
Because you could have a pump in your hand, but still want the pump that's on the top of your deck.
Okay.
Because like if you have a lace in your hand that's like overlapping with another one, and the top card of your deck's a Premeditate, well, you're gonna want to play the Premeditate over the lace that's stacking over itself.
Okay. All right. Okay. In terms of attack actions, I believe that is all of them. Okay, let's talk about the pumps, then we'll talk about the traps. So in terms of pumps, we have Lace with Blood Rot, Lace with Frailty, Lace with Inertia in a 3-2-3 split. I remember you drafted a deck that had a bunch of these. If there's good in draft, sometimes it translates to being good in CC. Is there a particular reason why you went 3-2-3? Is it just because the Frailty token is not that relevant in the current
It's
metagame?
not as relevant in this meta. It makes your warrior matchup better, but you really don't need to make your warrior matchup better.
Yep. I totally agree. At the current moment, things are kind of rough. Okay. So these block for 2 and they attack for 3. So in general, when you draw laces, you're not going to be blocking with them. Is that generally true?
Unless blocking with them gets more than the amount of value that playing the lace would get, there's no way you put it on the combat chain blocking.
Okay. All right. Speaking of more 2 blocks, Premeditate. Like you said before, the Ponder token is very, very relevant. So, on hit draw card is pretty good. Anything to say about Premed, or is it just
It's great when you strike for 10.
You E-strike for 10. Okay, so
Yep.
Right, this does not... So, I keep on thinking, because Azalea's in the art, and, Azalea and Lexi played this, that it has to be attached to something like an arrow, but no, this can be attached to an E-strike. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
E-strike 10 on hit, get a Ponder token, or Rabble for 7, go again on hit, get a Ponder. It's, very powerful.
And if you can go Rabble into E-strike, both of them will have the on-hit effect, so that's quite good. Okay. Seek and Destroy, another well-loved, Azalea card, Lexi card. Very similar to Lace with Inertia, kind of creates that use it or lose it effect. Is there anything to be said about this, or is it just,
It's Lace with Inertia plus, you slap it on a Remorseless, and maybe it gets way more value than it's printed.
Okay. So there's 3 pumps there, 2, 3, so that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 pumps. And 17. We have Line It Up that we haven't talked about. So there's 17 pumps, 28 arrows. So Line It Up, this is, you talked about already how it synergizes with Stone Rain. Sometimes it can pair well with Drill Shot or Infecting Shot, depending on the state board state. It also blocks for 3, but it costs 1. So this is the first pump that costs 1. Is that very awkward, or is it mainly you're going to use Trench to kind of bail you out?
Trench pays for this most of the time because the arrow, you could pitch a red for some of the cards in your deck. That's not too much of an issue, but Trench usually lines this card up pretty good.
Okay, so that's all the pumps. I don't think there's any pumps in the sideboard. Oh, I guess there's a Rain Razors in the sideboard. Okay, you got 2 copies of Rain Razors. It's a reaction, or not a reaction, but it's a pseudo reaction. I guess the first question is, why are you running 2 instead of 3? Because
room.
Just need more, room and
more sideboard slots.
So I presume that, very similar to Azalea and Lexi, you really want to get at least 4 value from the Rain Razors. So is this a card that you're looking to pair with particular cards like Bolt and Shot and Falcon Wing, or is it kind of okay? Is there any other uses?
So you can push an Infecting Shot, and that would technically be worth 4 because of the Blood Rot token.
Okay.
Or if your opponent's too they're they really want to keep their arsenal, and you have a
Okay.
Seek and Destroy on something, you can Rain Razors, and a card is on average worth 3, so you could say it's worth 5.
Mhm.
But you really just push Rain Razors where you feel that you'll get the most value out of it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we have been talking for a decent amount of time, but I think one of the things that Riptide is known for is his traps. Whenever a trap you control triggers, it deals 1 damage to the attacking hero. So let's talk about some traps in the main board. I guess we'll get to Codex later. In the main board, there's the 3 legendary traps, and I mean, we talked about this a little bit before. That Spike Pit Trap sometimes comes out quite often. So let's talk about these 3 traps. Let's start with Buzsaw Trap, just because it's alphabetically first. So I guess the number one thing for those of you who are playing against Riptide is you have to understand and track the position of these 3 cards, because they're very, very devastating when they happen. So Buzsaw Trap, a 0-cost blue pitch ranger defense reaction trap that defends for 3, a legendary Riptide specialization, so there's only one of them. It says, when this defensive attack with power greater than its base, the attack can't gain power this turn. Its power becomes its base. So reactions and might tokens and I guess bolt and shot with rain razors. There's many different things. Or actually, does it affect, like, if you go pump into an arrow, does that work? Explain to the mechanics of this a little bit.
Alright, so Buzzsaw Trap, whenever an opponent plays a card with greater power, it's going to put it back down to its base power. So if you were to, like, play a pump and then play an attack and it would give it +3, you can Buzzsaw it and it gets rid of the +3 and it still blocks 3. So you'd be blocking 3 on 4 instead of 3 on 7.
Okay.
If your opponent, like, plays a Valor and you Buzzsaw their Dawn Blade,
It
it just ends their turn.
Yeah, it goes to 3 and then they're very sad. Yes, Buzzsaw Trap, not only does it end your turn, it also pings you for 1. Very, very, very strong. I guess this also deals well with things like Just a Nick, Pummel, Cast Bones, Cast Homes. Yeah, there's a lot of use from this card. Is this a card that you kind of set into Arsenal and wait, or you kind of just...
I don't like to sit on traps.
Okay.
Sitting on traps is how you lose value, and your deck is built to generate value. So it would just be bad to sit on a trap. I would use it where I can get it.
Okay. So, of note, Riptide does not have the... Unless you're running Remembrance, does not shuffle his deck. Is that correct? So
you have Quiver.
Oh, you have Quiver. Okay, so if you kind of notice your opponent is tracking where your traps are, you could shuffle and kind of mess up that. Okay, so anything else to talk about for Buzzsaw Trap, or?
Well, the legendary traps in general are what I would call high rolls on defense. They're just like, if you try to take a lot of damage to play a turn, and I draw the trap that correspondingly counters your deck, you will probably lose that game. They're just very punishing.
Yeah, it kind of forces you to play kind of this mid-rangey small ball style until you know the position of the different traps. All right. Up next, we have Collapsing Trap. This is one of the best ways to deal with a go-wide deck. Similar, blue pitch, 0-cost, ranger defense reaction trap, blocks for 3. It's also a legendary Riptide specialization. It says, when this defends an attack with Go Again, the attacking hero discards their hand and then draws that many cards -1. So generally, this is worth 6, or maybe even more, depending on the texture of their hand. This kind of reminds me of Scowling Fleshbag, in that you can intimidate or take away a card from them. You can kind of mess up their whole hand. There's many applications for this. And one of the biggest feels bad cards in the game, I think. Like Arc-like Sentinel and Collapsing Trap, I think, they're 2 of the most feels bad it's in the game. Uh, any specific tech or
You
information
have
on
to
this
be
card?
you have to be very careful when you play this card against Zen. You should. I
Okay.
tried not to play this card on their pop-off turn. I try to play it before Zen because on their pop-off turn they're gonna block with strides and then activate Zen, and they're gonna create fake cards in their hand that are crouching tigers. So you'll
Ah.
actually end up drawing them cards if you cast this at the wrong point in the game. So you have to be really careful in the Zed
Mhm.
when you cast this. And if you play against a Rhinar, it will intimidate your whole hand if you play this.
Okay, so today I learned. Okay, guys, that's actually pretty funny. I guess KO would also make a might token as well.
I played against a
Yeah.
KO. I cast this, and he discarded 2 Beast Withins, and I
Uh,
said,
hmm.
"That's pretty good."
That's pretty good. Yeah, discarding beats with it to collapsing trap. That's a high roll there. Okay, the final and probably the most situational for most decks in the game, but not for warriors, is Spike Pit Trap. Same stats as the other two. It says when this defends and the attacking hero has played or activated a reaction, this chain link. So this can be an attack reaction from hand. It can be a reaction on the equipment. Put the top card of their deck into their graveyard. Then they lose X health, where X is the number of cards in their graveyard with that name. So if you're playing something as a 9 of and they hit it off the top, you could explode from 10. Because Spike Pit Trap would deal 1 and then 9 copies in the graveyard. Have you killed anybody from 8, 9, 10 health with this
Yeah.
card?
I killed a Bolton from 8 with a Soul Bond active
Oh,
with this card.
oh boy.
They played a card, gave it go again, and I milled Take Flight,
Oh,
and
damn.
they just lost the game. And I was
Yep.
like, "Wow."
Yep. So this is a card that has the narrowest application, but in terms of raw damage, it actually has like a wide range, right? It could be like, oh, they just take 2 or 3, or they could take 8, 9, 10. So there's no real way to set this up so that it's perfect timing. You might
just
be
keep
able,
pitching it.
yeah, you just keep pitching it, and then there's the threat of it at the end of the game, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other things to say about Spike Trap other than warrior players watch out for this?
It only comes into Warrior, Assassin, and Slapdash.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we have those 3 legendary traps, but we also have a smattering of other traps in the sideboard. We got 2 copies of Frailty Trap, so when this defends an attack with Go again, create a Frailty. Good against Kadachis, good against dual wield warriors, good against,
Mandible Claws.
Mandible Claws in Reiner and Lovia. Even in KO, it's still pretty decent too. And it pings 1, so this is often blocking for 3 plus a frailty. So on larger weapons, this can be worth, or on dual wield, this can be worth an extra 1 to 2 value, and it deals damage. So this is actually one of those cards that, gets a lot more value than you think. And I guess it's just currently running 2 because same reason why it lays for frailty. So this is something that, based on the meta, you can adjust a little bit. Okay, we got 3 copies of Inertia Trap. This, prevents them from setting up. Power higher than its base happens a decent amount of the time. How strong is an Inertia token in this metagame, do you think?
It depends on who the hero is.
Mm-hmm.
But against like somebody like KO, it's the difference between like arsling a Bear Fangs or a Blood Rush. So I would say it's very high value. Into like something like an Assassin, it stops the arsenal of like a Justinic Bonds, depending on the situation.
Okay, so it could be quite strong. Okay, we also have good old Boulder Trap. This plus Drill Shot will eat up the armor pretty fast. And if they see a single boulder trap, they're a little bit more incentivized to block with their armor, which makes all your other arrows better. I guess this comes in against heavy armor decks and decks that, I guess Brute, Guardian, Warrior, these are all top contenders for this one.
Zen.
Zen.
This card's for Zen.
Okay. You would put the -1 counter on the
Traverse.
Okay. All right. Then we have 3 copies of Tar Pit Trap. So this is a very, very unique card in that when it defends an attack with Go Again, the next time an attack action card hits this turn, effects don't trigger. There are lots of on-hit effects of note. Most of them are like... There's some positive and some negative on-hit effects, and this obviously affects both of them. The classic one is, Snatch, Bolt of Courage type effects. Is there other notable on-hit effects that you really want to deny?
Command and Conquer.
Okay, so if the Command and Conquer has Go Again, or
no,
comes at the
you
end
play
of the
it
chain.
before yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this card is played. I think this is one of the best traps that you have access to. Because into like assassins like new, if they swing a dagger, you can tar pit it, and their next thing just doesn't have words on it. Or they try to like hit a bond and they have to crack their boots to do it. The tar pit just covers it up and stops the on hit. You don't have to tar pit trap the thing that you want to have the on hit. You tar pit the thing before it so that you don't have to deal with the on hit of the thing that comes after it. Because if you tar pit something with Go Again, you could just say, I don't care what the next thing you do is, because it's just vanilla damage to me. I like where my hand's at. I'm going to tar pit this now.
Okay. So a lot of the power from this card comes from the safety of, okay, now my hand is secure. I can play this hand how I want it to.
This card gives so much agency.
Yeah, and that is a key thing in Flesh and Blood, is especially when you're dealing with a wide attack pattern. Often it becomes very difficult to block correctly against a wide attack pattern, and this is, like you said, one of the great agency givers. Okay, I think we have talked about every single card in the deck, Damien. Is there any... I saw you have a little bit of a maybe board here. Is there any other cards that you think like are very, very meta dependent, or I don't know if you want to talk about these, or there's any other cards?
No, so the traps are all meta dependent for the most part. And Stonewall's for like, we played it for Zen originally because it would block for 4, but Stone Rain outweighed the value of this card.
Okay, sure.
So it got cut from the deck. That card is in a meta where we see like wider non-combat chain breakable turns. This card could maybe make a comeback. But most of the sideboarding comes from the traps.
Okay. Is there any other traps that you would like to talk about? I know Tripwire Trap is a trap that saw some play in some lists recently. Is there any other traps you want to talk about?
Not really.
These are the good ones. The good ones are good.
Yeah, I mean, Pitfall and Tar Pit are probably the 2 Crucible traps that I would play if I wanted to play a more defensive style deck. Okay. But being only able to block with them from your arsenal does restrict some of your play lines.
Yeah, you might have to trap from hand, load it back, and then play it from arsenal.
If you already have an arsenal too, you have to trench away the arsenal, so you have to CNC yourself.
Okay. Okay, so I think we've talked about all the cards. Could you talk to me? Oh, I guess we have to talk about Codex. I was going to ask about like power cards and like which cards are you like looking for on the big turns. And I guess this is one of the, one of the strongest cards in the whole game. This is the card in this list that has been called for a ban for a year and a half now. Is there any specific lines to Riptide that are a little bit different than Lexi and Azalea, or is it just go wide, and end with a Codex into a 4-power arrow?
Well, Codex is actually like a mid-turn play half the time.
Okay.
Because you would go like pump, reload, bolt and shot, Codex. You'd have like a face-up arrow. You could Codex for Ravenous Rabble. That happens a lot.
Okay.
Just to like extend the turn and then end with a Ponder token. It's just like it's the best card in your deck again.
Yeah. There's a lot of good cards in this deck, though. I mean, this is why a lot of people are thinking that this deck is, on the cusp of being an S tier deck. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the general strategy of the deck. So, in general, we're going pretty fast, but I guess it kind of depends on the trap density. We talked a little bit about sideboarding, how sometimes you bring in 60, sometimes you're closer to 70. Can you talk to me a little bit about like how long ideally do you want most games to go?
It depends on the matchup. If you're playing an aggro matchup, you would like the game to end very quickly. You would like to get, like, if it's like Viscerai or Zen, or like, yeah, that's like, or Katsu. You want to like end the game really quickly with like very aggressive attacks.
Okay.
And then like eke out value with your traps where you could get them.
Okay. Is there any like particular lines you're trying to set up against most of the heroes other than, Sharpshooters plus Stone Rain and maybe Remorseless and Seek and Destroy? Is there any other like notable 2-card combinations that you're trying to set up?
Plus endless.
A
pump plus endless arrow.
Okay.
Because that's like recurring value over the course of. If you can like recur endless arrow 3 times, that card's done its job like 2 times over.
Okay. Now there's so a lot of people have looked at Riptide and said, Herder, you don't have a weapon, we can fatigue you, right? So let's say your opponent, you kind of notice in the middle of the game, they're like trying to block you out. How would you, from a high level sense, try to adapt to that with this particular deck?
I wouldn't block anything unless I have a trap. And then I would just fatigue them through damage.
Yep. I think people have kind of realized that trying to fatigue Riptide is near impossible with most Riptide lists, to be honest. I don't even really remember a Riptide list that could be fatigued unless they played poorly. So yeah, I know that some of the members of New Horizons have talked a little bit about fatigue and Riptide. Is there any advice that you want to give other than don't block anything that they're sending?
Well, it's more like you can still block with arrows if you think they're fatiguing you, but you can't lay down like multiple arrows. You need to keep threat density in your deck. And you need to make sure your endless arrows stay in your deck.
Okay.
Because the endless arrow is your weapon. And when they run out of armor, these breakpoints start eating away at them. And especially cards like Endless Arrow, and they start requesting 2 cards every time. So 2 for 1, you just keep doing that over the course of the game. You have Quiver. You just start adding up.
Yeah, Quiver, Codex. You have Dominate from Stone Rain, all the pings from all the traps. Yeah, I think, especially at this with all these new power cards, I don't think fatiguing Riptide is a viable strategy for most heroes in the game. You'd have to be like a really dedicated Decimator warrior or a really defensive Bravo or something like that. If you're not one of those heroes, I don't really think this can be done.
You'd have to be a Guardian or a Decimator deck, and you couldn't play too many defense reactions either because you will die to Dreadpour.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how to approach different matchups. So, before we started recording this video, we made a couple of matchups, but I do want to talk about 6 or 7 of the top level decks. So I guess let's start off with the boogeyman of the format. We have Zen. So in this matchup, you brought in the Inertia Traps, and I think we took out a Searing Rain or Searing Shot, and took out a Spike Pit Trap, and we put in
We put in the Inertia Traps.
Inertia Trap. Yeah, put in the Inertia Traps. Okay.
And
Yep.
Boulder Trap.
And Boulder Trap. Yep. So 5 cards went in, a couple cards left, and there were 3 slots available. So I remember at the beginning of this episode, you talked about how this Zen is not a favored matchup, but it's not completely horrible. How does that matchup typically go?
If they transcend in the first few turns of the game, that game's probably over unless you could apply constant pressure, like constant sleep darts or morselesses going over their armor. Something like that.
Seek and Destroy, Inertia. So Azalea has red in the ledger, right? That's the main disruptive tool. Riptide does not really have access to that, and he doesn't have access to Dominate either. So you're basically relying on Sleep Dart and the Arsenal Hate. Maybe Stone Rain is going to be very, very helpful as well.
If you can line up a collapsing trap, that will help a lot.
Yep. But have to remember that if they have pseudo real cards like the Crouching Tigers, this could actually help them draw cards. So okay, so tough matchup, but it can be winnable if you draw enough disruption. In terms of damage output, would you say Riptide has above average damage output, or?
I would say that his average turn is threatening 9 on a 2-card hand, depending on the on hit that's being presented. So it's usually a 2-card 7 or a 3-card 10 has various on hits. I can hit upwards of 24 damage with go wide turns and 5-card hands.
Okay. So that sounds like pretty typical for an aggro deck, but defensively, you're a little bit better than most aggro decks because you do have some 2 blocks, but most of your deck blocks for 3. You also have some D-reacts there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about new. For this matchup, you said that you would bring in the Dreadbore and the Perch Grapplers, and then you played every single card that was available. So you kind of treat this as a very, very, very long back and forth affair.
Well, you play all the cards just in case it gets there, but the games with new actually don't go that long. Because
okay.
new can't block you out. They don't have armor, and I like to think that if you're trying to block me out, you're reliant on your armor. The moment you run out of armor, you're in a very bad spot. New doesn't really have armor. She has a 1 block on her boots, her hand. You don't really want to block with Tunic, and Mask of Recurring Nightmares that's something you really want to block with either. They play no blocks as well, so it can get really sketchy for them.
Yep.
And then you have Dreadbore, and if they had defense reactions in their deck.
Yeah, if Dreadbore prevents the D-reacts from hand, so if they want to play those D-reacts, they have to set them into Arsenal, and that makes their offense. Generally, news want a powerful offensive card in Arsenal, so that they can combine them well with cards from hand. Else they're just reliant on drawing, persuasive with just a Nick, and that can happen, but the chance of that is lower. And you're a deck with a lot of D-reacts, so sometimes they, push over by 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you have 2 D-reacts, you can obviously deal with that. Yeah. I guess so you mentioned Mask of Recurring Nightmares. Some decks are very, very fragile against new because they don't know what disruption is coming. Is it going to be Siren's Call? Is it going to be Mask? Is it going to be something else? It seems like, given the blue count of this deck plus the fact that your damage output doesn't change that much if you get a card ripped from your hand. you talked about agency and consistency. How disruptive is new to Riptide?
It's not that disruptive. You
Yeah.
could plan your turns around almost. So you'll see the attack ahead of time. You'll see what attack it is. If it's like a Bonds of Agony and you have a trap in your hand, you can actually just not block with the trap. You can block with 2 cards, and if they like have double Nick or something, you could play the trap in your hand and then reload the arrow you kept. So the Bonds doesn't hit anything, and you can still throw an attack back at the end of your turn. And all you took was damage.
Yeah, Riptide seems like one of the decks in the format that can really deal with new if you're an experienced Riptide player and you can kind of predict the attack pattern. It definitely seems like a matchup though that you would have to practice quite a bit, right?
Yes, you need some reps in this deck. It will look hard at first until you learn like where you need to play your traps and how you need to block. Okay. But once you figure that out, it's an incredibly favored matchup.
Okay. And that is one of the reasons why Riptide is one of the contenders for, at least the top section of the metagame, is because against, I mean, we saw Azuri win Pro Tour. I presume New, Azuri, and Arachne all kind of play similarly, right? Or is
it? Arachne is a weird one. Arachne, actually, the game always goes long. Yeah. So you have to, like, not make mistakes. You are favored into Arachne, but, like, the wrong hand, the wrong Eradicate hitting could be really bad.
Okay. Yeah, if they take away one of your legendary traps, that could be quite devastating. Okay, let's talk about the other matchup that we have prepared. We have KO. So in this matchup, running Death Dealer, but we're also running Perch Grapplers, mainly to pair with some of the armor to prevent a CNC or send packing or something like that. In terms of defense reactions, brought in the Tar Pit Trap and the Boulder Trap, and the Frailty Trap and the Inertia Trap. So this is one of those matchups where we're not playing the whole deck. There's still some cards in the sideboard. We took out the Spike Pit Trap. So talk to me a little bit about matchups where you bring in some extra cards, but you're not running the full, 73.
They're matchups that you need to hedge against long games. So KO is a deck where you will be blocking a lot. They will be throwing Bear Fangs. They'll be throwing like Wild Rides. You'll actually need to place like a lot of cards in front of them and play a value-based game for most of the game. Okay. If the KO deck is built in a way where they have a very large number of 3 blocks and there are no blocks for like not there, they could pivot to fatigue after you lay down a bunch of cards in front of like a Blood Rush turn or 2 Blood Rush turns. It could get really sketchy.
Okay, so this is kind of like a hedge against possible fatigue, and I mean most of these traps are going to be indirectly helping your offense because it's going to be pinging them so much.
He triggers every trap that isn't reaction.
Yeah, because he goes wide and he has might tokens, so everything's going to get triggered. Okay, there's a couple other we don't have these prepared here, but we will have them for our Patreon members. But we could talk from a little bit of a high level perspective. So let's talk about Enigma, because I think that is one of the most popular decks at the moment. This is a matchup. It seems like when we talk about all the Riptide matchups, they all seem very unique and different. So can you talk to me a little bit about Enigma? Like what makes this matchup kind of unique and how do you approach that matchup?
Since we're an aggro deck, we are favored into Enigma due to like being super aggressive and being able to throw really tall Merkmire grapnels with a Dreadbore. So basically, you're keeping them. You're just putting on pressure the entire game, and then you're asking them to have solutions for your traps when they attack you. Like if they make a Mirror Guy and pitch a blue, and they like counter swing it, they can't do that because you'll just trap it and kill it. They need to like keep like uphold tradition up, or like a Chi in hand, or they'll lose their board.
And from the Enigma's perspective, this is just another unique matchup they have to learn. This is one of those matchups where, like, if you're playing against a newer Enigma player that hasn't played this matchup, it's almost unlosable, right? Because you make one small mistake, you're toast as an Enigma.
There are points as the Enigma player, you are just supposed to make an aura and dry pass, just like not do anything.
Mhm.
And that would be the correct line because I could just kill your aura.
Yep.
But there are times that is really problematic because if you do that and I draw all pumps and an arrow,
Mhm.
that's pretty bad. You just lost value. So the matchup is like super tricky.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Uh, I know we talked a little bit about Victor and Victor being one of the very, very difficult matchups for the deck. What makes that matchup so tricky?
Clash cards.
Clash cards. This deck cannot win against yeah, you don't have any 6-power cards. Basically, you have to reveal Cast Homes or Pummel for them to lose.
Or Estrike.
Yeah, or
on
Estrike.
Estrike.
You can tie that. So they're being a Guardian deck. They have quite a bit of armor, but they also have Disruption, CNC Pummel, and they have a whole suite of annoying things. Is that kind of just go fast and kind of hope that they don't see something super disruptive?
It's just like you need to present a lot of pressure. You need to eat their armor really fast, and it's like really tough because Guardians can just like not play a turn.
Yeah,
they can just like lay down their hand.
And Victor wants to anyways. He wants to block with Test of Strength and Trounce anyways. So yeah.
And those are the cards that just lose you the game because they'll like win a clash, reveal a choke slam, play it, like hold up Pummel, and you're just like, I have traps for this, but Pummel is still a problem.
Yep, because Pummel comes in for 4, and all the traps in the deck block for 3. Okay. Couple others that I want to touch on. So Dash is a hero that could be built in several different ways. Most current lists of Dash are running a switch style, and generally Dash is going to be playing aggro into you, I presume, if they're a switch deck.
I would believe so. If they flip over like induction, they're like triggering. They're asking to trigger every trap in the game. Because greater power go again reactions on, induction chamber. I think if they flip over induction, it's like pretty favored for me. But if they like flip over pounder, it gets sketchy because Dash can just like play maximum velocities. We can fatigue them. We can outrace them depending on the hands they draw.
Yep.
But Tekla Pounder really pushes the limits of racing them.
Does T-Bone or Pulse Wave Harpoon really affect your deck in any way?
Pulse Wave getting like value on pulling a pump out of hand is noteworthy. T-Bone's not as crazy because you have Snapdragon Sharpshooter block with. They can just like if they have 3 T-Bones or Magnetic Shockwave, they got you. But it's
yeah, if they have 3 armor pulling effects, I presume you're going Snapdragons, Sharpshooters, and then
New Horizons.
Like we said at the beginning, you basically are never giving this up until the very, very bitter end. Okay. I guess maybe let's just talk about one more matchup. So, Kano. Now, normally we talk about how much Kano respect are you giving. You have AB1. Obviously, you're a very red-heavy deck. I mean,
if you play if I wanted to.
Yeah, you can't pitch it anyways. So I mean, Kano, you're just saying, all right, if you flip over Kano, all right, bro, let's have a 8-minute game and go get lunch.
It's not terrible. It's
okay.
It's technically winnable.
Technically
if Kano doesn't, if you just like draw the aggressive hands and they just don't draw the wildfire, you can win.
Okay.
The odds of that happening are not amazing, but
yeah, they're gonna spindle and go through their deck really, really quickly. Okay, I mean, there's not much to say other than just go fast, right? Because with 57, I presume you're just gonna bring in a couple more arrows. Probably
you bring in Rain
and a Murkmire or something. Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, well, now we come to the section of the video where I ask you for advice on how to play against Riptide. So we try to talk about, how to play the deck, why you should play the deck. Damien, if somebody is looking to get better at playing against Riptide, what are some tips and advice you would give them?
You, before making a play, need to think about all the traps that they could play against you, and think about if it's worth it to make the current play. How many of each trap they've used, and if you think it's disruptive. Like, usually most of the time, playing around legendary traps isn't applicable unless you, know that they have it. But there are play lines that you could make that lose one value here or there to play around certain traps that will save you in the long run. There's also plays that you might make that trigger no traps. Like, you wouldn't normally take a setup turn here, but you'll do it here because of traps. Because traps aren't game ending. If you go big enough, it doesn't. Like, with Zen, I may have collapsing trap, but if your turn's set up in a way where it's like double Artivore, you just draw. You draw one less card, but you're still doing 45 damage. So.
Okay. Is there any particular tech cards? I mean, Command and Conquer obviously comes to mind, but is there any other tech cards? Is Warmongers very, very annoying? I know that's very devastating for Azalea. Is Warmongers annoying for Riptide, or is it kind of...
Warmongers is very hit or miss. Sometimes Warmongers saves you a turn. They present 5. But then they play I had somebody play Warmongers against me, and I went 4 wide against them. So
yeah, Rabble into Estrike into...
It was Rabble, Reload, Falcon Wing, Estrike into
something.
Wait. Oh, it was 2 Rabbles. It was
2 Rabble.
Falcon Wing, Rabble.
So Rabble and Estrike was used when Warmonger's Diplomacy was seeing a lot heavier play in Azalea to hedge against that. So I guess similar story here for Riptide. Yes. Okay, is there any other tips or tricks you would like to give people, if they want to get better against playing against Riptide?
You really have to know how to play Riptide to play against Riptide. It's just a deck that you need to understand how they want to play the game, and you need to try to restrict how they would like to play the game. It's not too much to say about it.
It seems like this is very, very, very matchup dependent, which actually, this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode, is because it seems like Riptide has so much depth. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Damien, I guess we are kind of, getting to the end of the episode. Well, I'll give you a chance to, wrap things up. You have any shout-outs, anything else you want to say before we get out of here? I know it's getting kind of late. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I already shouted out the team and the people that people worked on the deck. There's not much left to say about the deck. The deck is very flexible. You don't if you're taking this to your armory, you don't need to play this exact list. You can change out cards based on what your opponents are playing. You could add more Frailty Traps if people are playing more like Levia and stuff like that.
Okay.
So deck's very flexible.
And it seems like the more you play this deck, the better you're going to get with it. It really rewards good piloting and understanding. And once you play the deck enough, you can make these on-the-fly deck building changes. I guess let's... So we're basically going to wrap this episode up now, but I think we're going to try to record a bonus episode talking about a different style of Riptide, the more controlling style. This is a deck that Pablo put out for Pro Tour 5. So that'll be a bonus episode that'll come out tomorrow. But I guess we could kind of wrap things up now. So thank you guys for watching this episode of Fab AtoZ. This has been episode number 5. Big shout out to Fabric, Magnolia Games, and Dragon Shield for sponsoring this video series. If you guys want a full deck list with different matchups and a little bit of a sideboard guide, that is going to be up on our Patreon. I'm going to type that up and get that out So that will be available when this episode releases. Obviously, we have 31 episodes planned, so that's going to be a lot of content. Good value there. Okay, well, Damien, any final words? Thanks for teaching me how to play this deck and teaching me about the hero. This has been very, very, very enlightening.
Very fun deck.
Yes, I could tell there's a lot of passion. Like your whole team loves this hero, and that's and I think he's just gotten better and better and better over time. And I think a lot of people need to watch out for Riptide. So yeah, I think grab a Azalea deck. If you have any old Lexi cards, those transition very, very well to Riptide. So yeah. All right. Well, this has been Josh Lau with TheCardGuyz with Damien Riggins, our Riptide expert. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a good week. Take care.